Hey, what's up guys? Slippin here, ready to make a video on how to settle your first city strategically in Sid Meier's Civilization VI. If you are a complete beginner to Civilization VI, then this video is for you. So first things first, you go ahead and create a game, and you can go ahead and create a game here. We're just going to play on Prince, Standard, Continents, and Random. We're going to go ahead and load up our first example. If you're a complete beginner, your map's going to look something like this. Go ahead and click onto Map Options. I would go up to Show Yield Icons and click that on. That will turn on all of your yields on every single tile. So now I can see that every tile has yields. I can see that this tile has 2 food, 2 food, 2 food, 1 production. And this is going to help me make my decision on how to settle my first city. As well, I'm going to want to get familiarized with these lenses. So there are quite a few lenses here. I think there are 10. The settler lens is going to help us with settling cities. Now, if you're playing on PC, your hotkey is 4 for the settler lens. You can see I can turn that on just by clicking on 4. So the settler lens is showing me where the fresh water is. Now, why is it important to settle on fresh water? Well, as a base, your capital city will get 2 housing for being a city and 1 housing from the palace. So if I chose to settle on this gray tile, which is a no water tile, I get 3 housing. If I chose to settle on this light green tile here, I would get +1 housing because it is a coastal city. And so that would make me have 4 housing in my capital city. And if I chose to settle on these dark green tiles, that would give me 6 housing. Now, why is housing important? Well, the amount of districts that you can build in a city is directly related to how much housing you have, or how much population you have, rather. And once you hit your max population, you start receiving food surplus penalties and multipliers that make growing your city extremely, extremely hard. So more housing you have in a city, the better. If I settle on this city, we'll go ahead and settle on this city. My city will have 2 food, 1 production. And if I chose to settle on this 2 food tile, I would also get 2 food, 1 production. That's because your city center gets a minimum of 2 food, 1 production, no matter what. I could settle on this desert tile here and my city center would still get 2 food, 1 production. Now, like I was talking about housing, you can see I have 6 housing because I get 2 housing from being a city, 1 housing from the palace, and then 3 housing from being on fresh water. So my city center's minimum is 2 food, 1 production, but it can have more. So one thing we need to talk about as well is what are features and what are bonus resources. Features are things like woods, which give us +1 production to any tile. Rainforest, which gives food to any tile, and marsh, which gives food to any tile as well. Bonus resources include things like rice, which gives +1 food to any tile, maize that gives +2 gold to any tile, and then we have wheat that gives +1 food to any tile. We have deer that gives +1 production to any tile, and copper that gives +2 gold to any tile. Now, if I settle on a feature, it will ask, do you want to found a city here? It will remove the woods. So if I settle a city here, it will get rid of the forest and my city center will still be 2 food, 1 production. But if I choose to settle a city on the rice, we keep that +1 food. And now my city center has 3 food, 1 production. So luxury resources behave in a similar fashion. You can see here, we have a regular flatland tundra tile. So that's a flatland tundra tile has usually 1 food. Then we have the woods, which is giving +1 production. And then we have the silk, which is adding an extra culture to this very tile. Same with the marble. You can see that this is a grassland tile with marble. Grassland tiles are usually 2 food. And now we have the marble. This is offering an extra culture to this tile. And if we chose to settle here, it will ask us, do we want to remove the woods? And so we would lose the production on this tile. So this tile would actually be a 1 food, 1 culture tile, but because our city center is a minimum 2 food, 1 production, we would still be 2 food, 1 production, but we would gain the extra culture from it. So we got our second example here and we have rolled Egypt. So you can see that I'm on a Plains Hill, right? I float my cursor above, it says Plains Hill, and a Plains Hill without any woods or anything on it has 1 food, 2 production. Now our city center is always going to be 2 food, 1 production minimum, but if I settle on a Plains Hill, and it already has a production without a feature on it, I will gain an extra production from that, right? So city centers will always be a minimum of 2 food, 1 production, but it can still gain yields. So they say that, and I agree with this, that Plains Hills are just fantastic tiles to settle on. And I completely agree with this 100% because you gain that extra production in the early game. And in this example here, you can see that I'm on a river. I'm also on a coast. Harbors are fantastic districts. They get +2 gold for each adjacent city center and adjacent districts and stuff like that, and +1 gold for each adjacent coastal resource tile. So right now we don't have adjacent coastal resource tiles, but this harbor would be a +2 harbor because it's adjacent to the city center. And once you pick up the lighthouse in the harbor, you gain +1 food on all coastal tiles for the city and +2 housing if the city is adjacent to the coast, and you get an extra trade routes. Trade routes are fantastic. So settling coastal cities are a wonderful way to get gold, housing, and food. Another thing that I want to talk about, you can see in this city that I am working a 1 food 3 production tile. So this city is not going to grow for 15 turns. Now this can be a pretty big problem, especially if you're playing on harder difficulties, because if you're playing on DD difficulty, the AI actually gains 4 settlers to start out the game. So getting a second city really, really quickly is a huge thing on harder difficulties. If you're playing on Prince or you're playing on easier difficulties, you can actually just relax and take your time with stuff like this. But one thing that I like to focus on, especially in the early life of a city, is focusing on food tiles. Now, if I work this 2 food tile, the one thing that I need to understand about my cities in Civilization 6 is that every citizen here costs me 2 food to work. So you can see here that I'm gaining 4 food from work tiles and I got -2 food from population. Well, you have 2 citizens here. Well, not really, because the citizen in the city center is free. You can see that I have 1 population. It's talking about the population outside of the city center. So if I work this 2 food tile, I'm actually gaining nothing. I'm gaining absolutely nothing. And this is the only tile that's making me anything, right? So obviously I want to work something that is going to give me some sort of profit. But if I work this tile here, this citizen is actually costing me 1 food. So I'm only getting a +1 food surplus. So my city is going to grow very, very slowly. Or if I pick up a 2 food tile, it's going to grow in 8 turns. Now, why is this a problem? Well, the problem is that I'm not gaining any production from this, right? So it's something to take and consider before you settle the city, right? Is what are my 6 tiles around my city? So in this situation, you got to ask yourself, what's important to you? I mean, we could technically move to the coast. We would get less housing, which is unfortunate, but then we could potentially, if we built a city here, we could potentially build an aqueduct here, and that would give us a little more housing later down the road. Then we could build a harbor with a lighthouse that would give us much more housing. And then we would have a 3 food tile that would give us a net profit of 3 and help us grow our city much faster. I believe 5 turns. If we're not tied to having a harbor this game, say we're playing on a Pangea map, we could move to this tile here. That would net us a couple of 2 food 1 production tiles, and then we have access to a luxury resource. One thing that I try to consider when I settle a city as well is leaving enough room for a second city. The next 3 tiles over, you will not be able to settle another city. You basically block out any other city nearby. So if I settled here, I wouldn't be able to settle any more cities on this river. This would be my only city on the river. So I would be tempted to potentially settle a city on the T. It would cost me a couple of turns. Another thing that I do before I even move my settler is I use my warrior as a bit of a scout, but I would probably settle on the T, and settling on the T would immediately give me an extra science in the capital because the T gives 1 science to whatever tile it's on. We are working the 1 food 2 production, but I would rather work the 2 food 1 production. Yes, the yields are pretty much the same if I had settled on this tile and worked the grassland tile, but now I've netted myself an extra science in the capital. Not only that, but I can settle another city on this river. And if I settle the city here, then I'd be able to pick up a harbor, and so on and so forth. So for this example, we have rolled Rome, Trajan of the Roman Empire. Fantastic. We have landed on a lake. Right away, I noticed the tundra, right? So if you see tundra, you're on one end of the map. You can actually just back out. I can see the edge of the map here. If you're playing on PC, you hold your mouse cursor, press Alt, and you can actually turn and see the edge of the map. I can go north. You can turn and see the edge of the map. It's also a really good strategy to do that at the beginning of any game. But looking at this settling a location, you can see that I'm in a bit of a conundrum right now because I have really, really low food around me. I do have this fishing tile here. I have a marsh tile over here. We have some luxury resources over here, and so on and so forth. So because I know that in the early game, food is super, super important, especially for growing a city, especially for, gaining momentum and snowballing and stuff like that. What in this sort of situation, I would probably actually, first off, we haven't really covered this, but if you go into the settler lens, you can see that every tile next to a lake is also dark green. So lakes also give fresh water. So they're no different than rivers in that way. You can see that I have no food in the first 6 rings of my city. I do have 2 food on this fish resource, which is, it's okay. But in this situation, because I know that food is so important, it really helps to snowball and gain momentum. And especially because this is going to be my capital city, I'm probably going to move to this 1 food, 1 production tile. Now, normally what I would do is I would use my warrior as a bit of a scout. And I think I'm going to scout to the west. And we got ourselves a mountain range. And if you don't know, mountain ranges are good for holy sites and campuses. Geothermals are really good for campuses as well. So if I place the campus here, I would get a +2 campus immediately just for being next to the geothermal fissure. There is possibility for a nice campus up here as well. That's a +3 campus because we have 3 mountain tiles next to the tile here. We'll get into adjacencies and stuff like that maybe in a different video, but for the sake of this video, I'm talking about more strategies for settling our very first city. So to settle this very first city, I would probably move to this 1 food, 1 production tile. I would settle my city right here. And I would come in and I would force work the marsh tile. Yes, we have very, very low production, but we have a +3 food surplus immediately. So my city will grow in 5 turns. Once my city grows in 5 turns, I can justify working this 1 food, 2 production tile. Because once I work that 1 food, 2 production tile, my city will still have a +2 food surplus. It will still grow. Now, one thing to note about the lighthouse, because you might be tempted to build a harbor and then a lighthouse, thinking that it's going to give us more food. But one thing to note about the lighthouse gives +1 food on all coast tiles to the city and +2 housing if the city's adjacent to coast. So does not count for lake tiles, so that's something that we need to keep in mind as well. But there are other strategies to gain more food in a city, like farm triangles. We can always plug in Liang and start building fisheries. We can talk about things like that later on. But for early game strategies, it's always a good idea to move towards heavy food tiles so that we can continue to grow and then pick up other tiles. And then eventually we can place farm triangles all over the place. And once we pick up feudalism, this will net us quite a bit of food. This will net us about 3 food, 1 production on each tile. And then we can do something of a farm diamond. These will be 4 food, 1 production tiles. So, and then this city will grow very, very quickly. So I think that's going to be the end of the video. If you would like to see any more tutorial videos, please leave them in the comments. And if I've forgotten any key points, please let me know. I will probably end up remaking this video. This is one of my first tutorial videos, and I hope to make more tutorial videos like this. If you like this video, please hit that like button and leave me a comment. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. Thanks. Bye.